Hungry boy lies about sick, mom to get food. What the cop finds will break you. The wind was cold that evening, sharp like little needles against the skin. The streets were nearly empty, just a few tired lights glowing in shop windows, and walking. Alone, quietly, was a little boy, Elijah. Only 8 years old, wearing a sweater too big for him, sneakers that slapped the ground with every step. He held onto an old canvas bag like it was something precious. His eyes kept moving, scanning corners, watching shadows. Not because he was curious, because he was scared. But he didn't stop. He had a mission. He needed food. He crossed the street, slowed down in front of a small diner with a flickering red neon sign. Inside, it looked warm. People were talking, eating, laughing. It smelled like fried potatoes, grilled burgers, and fresh coffee. His stomach growled loud enough that he hugged himself to quiet it down. He took a breath, wiped his nose on his sleeve, and walked in. The bell above the door rang as he entered. A few people looked up. Most went back to their food. Behind the counter, the owner, Tom, a kind-faced older man, looked up from the register and smiled. "Well, if it isn't Elijah," Tom said, putting down his towel. "Haven't seen you in a couple days. You all right, kid?" Elijah nodded slowly, walking up to the counter. His voice was soft, barely above a whisper. "Hi, Mr. Tom. My mom's still real sick. I was wondering if maybe you had some extra food again?" Tom's smile faltered just a little. He nodded slowly. "Of course," he said, turning to grab a container. "She's still not eating much?" Elijah shifted his feet. "The doctor says she needs to rest a lot. She can't cook. She gets tired. Real easy." Tom studied the boy as he packed meatloaf, potatoes, green beans into the box. Elijah didn't make eye contact. His fingers twisted the strap of his bag over and over. His jeans were patched at the knees. His shoes weren't tied right. But more than anything, it was the way he talked, like he had said those words 100 times before. "Got some soup, too," Tom added gently. "Good for sick folks. I can. Bring some by tomorrow. Maybe check on your mom." That's when it happened. Elijah froze. Just for a second, but long enough. His eyes widened, then dropped. His voice cracked just slightly. No, thank you. She doesn't want visitors. The doctor says she needs quiet. Real quiet." Tom didn't argue. Just packed an extra slice of pie and handed the containers across the counter. Elijah thanked him, clutching the food to his chest like it was gold, then turned and walked out the door fast. Too fast. The bell jingled. He didn't look back. Tom watched him go. So did another woman at the counter, who sipped her coffee slowly. "I've lived in this town 40 years, she said, not looking up. "And I've never once seen that boy's mama." Tom sighed. "Yeah, me neither." And just like that, the whispers started. At the grocery store, someone said, "He always comes at odd hours." Always the same story. At the church, a volunteer mentioned, "He said his mom was in the hospital last week, but then said she was resting at home this week." And in the bakery, the owner told her assistant, "That boy's hiding something, and it's not just fear. It's something deeper." By the end of the week, nearly everyone in town had a version of the story. But none of them had answers. Only questions. Where did Elijah go when he left? Why wouldn't he let anyone help? Him? Why had no one, ever, seen this sick mother? That's when Officer Murphy heard about it. Not through an official call. Just regular conversation at the diner, the post office, even in line at the pharmacy. He didn't say much. He just listened. And later that night, as the wind picked up again and the leaves rustled through the quiet streets, he sat in his parked car across from the diner, watching, thinking. Because sometimes when something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. And when he finally decides to follow Elijah, what he finds will break your heart. Elijah didn't return to the diner the next day, or the day after that. Tom noticed, of course. He always noticed when someone disappeared from the usual rhythm of town life. And Pine Grove was the kind of place where people noticed things, especially things that didn't sit right. By the third morning, Elijah showed up not at Tom's, but at the bakery across town. It was early. The streets still glistened with frost, and the smell of cinnamon and fresh bread floated from the blue and white striped storefront. Inside, Mrs. Robinson was sliding a tray of golden rolls onto a cooling rack when the bell over the door gave its soft jingle. Elijah stepped inside slowly, eyes scanning the room like always, the canvas bag hanging from one shoulder. He looked even more tired than before. His eyes had dark circles under them now. His cheeks looked thinner, but he still gave a polite smile. "Morning, Elijah," Mrs. Robinson said, wiping her hands on her apron. "How's your mama doing?" He hesitated just a little, just enough to notice. Then he offered that same practiced line. "She's still real tired, ma'am. Doctor says she needs rest. I was wondering, do you maybe have some extra bread today?" Mrs. Robinson studied him for a moment. Her face was warm, kind, but behind her glasses her eyes were sharp. "Well now," she said, "I just made a big pot of soup, chicken and vegetables, old family recipe. Your mama could use something warm in her belly, don't you think?" "I think so. Yes, ma'am," Elijah said quickly, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Good," she smiled. "I can bring it by later this afternoon. I'll even throw in a loaf of my honey wheat." Panic, pure and sudden. "No, please, thank you, but, she doesn't want any visitors," Elijah stammered. "Doctor says quiet is real important. Quiet as possible." Mrs. Robinson nodded slowly, pretending not to notice the way his voice had caught, or how he was already inching toward the door. "All right, then. I'll just pack some to go." He gave a small, nervous thanks. Ewan left quickly, bag clutched close again. As the door swung shut behind him, the bakery assistant looked over. She'd seen the whole thing from behind the cookie display. "Something's not right," she whispered. "You saw that too, right?" Mrs. Robinson didn't answer right away. She just stared out the window as Elijah disappeared down the street. That afternoon, she mentioned the boy to Martha at the post office, who'd seen Elijah picking through the food scraps behind the church last week. Martha told Eleanor, her bridge partner. Eleanor brought it up when she stopped by Tom's diner. "He was here again last week," Tom said quietly, polishing a glass behind the counter. "Said the same thing. Sick mother, needs food. But when I offered to bring something over, he bolted. Like I'd just threatened him." "Has anyone actually seen his mother?" someone at the counter asked. "Not me," Tom said. "Not me either," Martha added. The question hung there. All through that week, little conversations kept happening, not gossipy, but concerned, watchful. At the grocery store, Mr. Daniels said he'd caught Elijah sneaking around the back door, asking about dented cans. At church, the pastor said he'd tried to visit the Williams home once, but couldn't find where they even lived. By Friday, the town's unease had grown quiet but heavy. No one knew where the boy came from each day, or where he went each night. Just that he kept returning with the same story. A sick mom. No help needed. Just a little food. Always polite. Always scared. And always gone before you could ask too. Much Officer Murphy finally stepped into the conversation. Quietly. He didn't open a case or file a report. He just started paying attention. He'd seen kids lie before. He'd seen desperation. But this was different. On Saturday, just after the breakfast rush, he parked across from the bakery and watched Elijah appear, just like clockwork. Same bag, same routine. He waited until the boy disappeared down a side street before pulling out and following at a distance. Elijah didn't walk like a normal child. He didn't dawdle, didn't skip or glance into shop windows. He walked with purpose, but checked behind him every few minutes, paused at corners, darted through alleys. Like he was on a mission. Like he was hiding something. Murphy tried to keep up. But once Elijah crossed the bridge at the edge of town, he vanished. 1 second he was there, the next, gone. Swallowed by the trees and brush lining the old trail, toward the outskirts. The cop sat there in his car, staring down the empty path. "This kid knows how to disappear," he muttered. "Too well." That night, Murphy called Tom. Then he stopped by Mrs. Robinson's. They met in the back booth of the diner after closing. Tom poured coffee. No one talked much at first. Then Murphy said the words they were all thinking. "I don't think there is a sick mother." Mrs. Robinson's eyes filled with quiet sadness. "Then what is there?" Murphy shook his head slowly. "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." By the time Sunday came, almost everyone in Pine Grove had heard something about Elijah. Not because people were being nosy. It wasn't that kind of town. It was the kind of place where folks still waved to each other from their porches and asked how your mom was doing at the gas station. So when enough people noticed the same strange thing, a little boy walking around with a sad face and a story that didn't quite sit right, it didn't take long for concern to spread like the autumn leaves falling across Main Street. He was polite, always said thank you, never asked for too much, but no one ever saw his home, no one ever saw his mother. And every time someone offered more than food, offered a ride, a visit, anything that felt even close to help, he panicked. It was Mr. Daniels, the grocer, who finally said it out loud to Officer Murphy. "I think he's lying, James, but I also think he's scared out of his mind. That's not a normal kind of fear. That's a boy running from something." Murphy didn't respond right away. He'd already been thinking the same thing. That evening, they met again at Tom's diner after the last customer left. Tom flipped the sign to "closed," and the bell over the door went quiet. The coffee pot was still warm, and the booths were empty except for one, where the grocer, the baker, the officer, and the diner owner sat like an unofficial town council. Murphy leaned back in the booth, rubbing his jaw. He knows how to avoid being followed. He moves through town like someone who's been trained to disappear. "He's only 8, Mrs. Robinson whispered, her hands folded tight in her lap. "What kind of child learns that?" Tom looked out the window into the quiet night. The neon sign above his diner flickered faintly, throwing soft red light across the sidewalk. "The kind who doesn't feel safe," he said quietly. They all sat in silence for a moment. Then Mrs. Robinson spoke again. "He came to the bakery this week. I offered to bring soup to his house, and the look on his face. James, I swear to you, I've never seen a child look so afraid. Not even when my own son broke his arm when he was little." Murphy nodded. "It's fear, all right, but not of people. It's like he's afraid of being found out." "Found out about what?" Daniels asked. Murphy paused. "That's what we're going to find out." He explained his idea. A soft approach. No uniforms. No knocking on doors. No questions that could make him run. Just observation. Gentle. Careful. Kind. "We're not trying to catch a criminal," Murphy said. "We're trying to protect a child. And we don't want to scare him into disappearing for good." The others agreed. That's how it began. What Mrs. Robinson later jokingly called Operation Shadow. But even through the jokes, her voice trembled a little, because this wasn't just a mystery. It was personal. They all felt it. The next morning, Officer Murphy parked across from the church pantry. He sat in his truck, sipping coffee, pretending to read the paper. Elijah arrived a little after 9. He was wearing the same patched jeans, the same oversized sneakers. His bag looked even heavier than usual. He waited until no one was looking, then stepped inside and came out minutes later with a small bag of food. Then he moved on. Across town, Murphy quietly followed. He watched Elijah stop at 3 more places that day: a restaurant alley, the back of the farmer's market, and the side door of a local deli. Always the same method. Ask for a little. Give a short, vague story, be polite, be invisible. But Murphy noticed something more. Elijah was building a route, a system, a schedule that looked random, but wasn't. He never visited the same place 2 days in a row. He took different streets each time. He'd change his walking speed if he felt someone was behind him. At least twice he ducked between buildings and doubled back like he was checking for tails. It was the kind of thing you might expect from a runaway teenager, not a little boy who should have been in school. By the end of the second day, Murphy was even more sure. This kid wasn't just scared. He'd been living like this for a while. At the next meeting at the diner, Murphy laid it all out. He had a map, pins marking each place Elijah had stopped, photos taken discreetly from across the street, a journal of patterns and changes. "I've never seen a child this careful," Murphy said quietly. Not unless someone taught him to be. Or unless he had no other choice. Mrs. Robinson pressed a tissue to her eyes. No child should have to live like that. "No," Murphy said, folding the map closed. "They shouldn't. Which is why tomorrow I'm going to try something different. No more watching. I'm going to follow him. All the way. No turning back. No hiding." Tom leaned forward. "You think he'll lead you to the truth?" "I think he already has," Murphy said. "I just haven't seen it yet." The others nodded. They didn't know exactly what they were about to find. But deep down, they all felt it. Whatever. It was Elijah had been hiding. It wasn't something bad. It was something sad, and they were ready to help. No matter what. The next morning came in quiet gray light, with clouds hanging low over Pine Grove like a heavy blanket. It was the kind of sky that made the streets feel slower, the sounds softer. But Officer Murphy was wide awake, dressed not in his uniform, but in a hoodie and old jeans, sitting behind the wheel of his personal truck. He didn't want Elijah to see a badge today. He didn't want to scare him. He just wanted to follow. And understand. At 8:52 a.m., right on the dot, Elijah appeared at the edge of town. He walked quickly, but not like he was rushing, like someone trying not to be seen but used to being watched. He wore the same clothes: oversized hoodie, patched jeans, and those tired sneakers. His bag looked heavy again, filled with something, wrapped carefully inside. Murphy started the engine but didn't move. He waited until Elijah turned the corner and disappeared down Mill Road, then slowly followed, keeping several houses behind. Mill Road wasn't what it used to be. It used to lead to Pine Grove's old lumber mill back when the town was growing. But the mill shut down years ago. Most of the houses near it were abandoned now. Cracked windows, caved roofs, yards overgrown with weeds that didn't care who they belonged to. Murphy's truck crawled along the edge of the road. Then he saw it. Elijah slipping through a gap in a rusted fence, disappearing behind a leaning 2-story Victorian house with peeling paint and boarded windows. The cop pulled off to the side, out of view, and got out. The air was colder here. The trees were closer, and everything was too quiet. He stepped carefully through the grass, boots barely making a sound. Then he heard it. A laugh, a small, high-pitched giggle. A child. Murphy froze. He stepped closer to the broken porch and found a small gap in the boarded window, just enough to see through. What he saw inside made him stop breathing for a second. Elijah was sitting cross-legged on the floor, unpacking the food from his bag onto a worn blanket. The room was surprisingly clean, considering the state of the house. There was a little lantern, battery-powered, sitting in the center, giving off a warm yellow glow. Around it, small stacks of canned food, some books, an old sleeping bag. But Elijah wasn't alone. A little girl, maybe 3 years old, sat beside him, clapping her hands as he opened a container of mashed potatoes. Her curly hair was wild and tied back with a pink ribbon. She had on a sweater far too big for her, but her eyes were bright. She looked up at Elijah with trust so deep it almost hurt to see. "Careful," Elijah whispered. "It's still hot. Blow on it like this." He demonstrated, and the girl mimicked him, giggling. Murphy stepped back, leaning against the wall of the house. He ran a hand down his face. It wasn't a lie. There was no sick mother. But Elijah wasn't just begging for food. He was protecting someone. Murphy knocked lightly, not on the window, not on the door, just enough to make a sound. The laughter inside stopped. A second later, the door creaked open, just enough for a small, frightened face to peer out. Elijah's eyes locked onto Murphy's. His whole body tensed. His hand reached behind him protectively. "Please." Elijah's voice shook. "Please, don't take her. She's all I have. Please, don't call anyone. I'll leave. We'll leave. Just don't take her." Murphy stepped back, hands raised slightly, voice soft. "I'm not here to take anyone, son. I'm just here to understand. That's all. I promise." Elijah didn't move for a long moment. His lip trembled. His shoulders were shaking. Then finally, he opened the door wider. "She's my sister," he said, voice small. "Her name's Amara." The little girl peeked around his side and whispered, "Hi." Murphy crouched to their level, his heart breaking. "Hi there, Amara." She looked up at Elijah. "Is he a friend?" Elijah looked at Murphy, unsure. Murphy gave a small nod. "I'd like to be." Inside, the house smelled like dust and damp wood, but the space Elijah had created was different. It was organized, swept clean, carefully lived in. A few handmade toys sat in a basket. A photo of a woman, their mother maybe, leaned against the wall next to a flashlight. A crayon drawing was taped to a beam. It showed a stick figure boy and girl holding hands with a big yellow sun above them. Murphy sat down slowly, cross-legged like Elijah. "You want to tell me what's going on?" Elijah hesitated. Then, softly, almost like it hurt to say, "Our mom died 3 months ago. She had cancer. I tried to tell the hospital not to call anyone, but they did anyway. A social worker came. They said we'd be split up. I'm old enough to be in a group home, but Amara would be adopted. I heard them talking about it outside the room." He looked down. "So I ran. I packed a bag and waited until they weren't looking. I took Amara, and we left. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I had to keep us together." Murphy nodded slowly, absorbing it all. "And since then, you've been living here? Alone?" Elijah nodded. "Getting food by asking for it? I didn't want to steal. I thought lying was better. If they knew the truth, they'd call someone. And they'd take her away." The little girl had finished her potatoes and crawled into Elijah's lap. She leaned her head on his shoulder, eyes starting to close. "She gets scared when I'm gone too long," Elijah whispered. "So I only go during the day, and I always come back before dark." Murphy stared at the two of them, the way Elijah wrapped an arm around her instinctively, protectively. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't safe. But somehow, against all odds, this boy had kept them alive. Not just alive, together. "You're not in trouble," Murphy said quietly. "Not with me, and not with anyone in this town." Elijah's eyes filled with tears, but he blinked them back. "But if they find out, they'll help," Murphy said. "That's what they'll do." He stood up slowly. "I'll be back. Not with anyone scary. Just people who care, okay?" Elijah didn't speak. He just nodded. And as Murphy stepped back out into the cold, cloudy day, He reached for his phone. He called Tom first, then Mrs. Robinson. He told them everything. And by the time the sun began to set, 3 cars sat quietly outside the abandoned house. Each one filled with warmth, food, blankets, and the open arms of a town ready to love 2 children who had been alone for far too long. The old house felt different when the sun began to sink behind the trees. Not colder, warmer, somehow. Not from the broken windows or the cracked walls, but from what came through the door that evening. Elijah stood just inside the entryway, holding Amara in one arm, her thumb tucked in her mouth, half asleep against his shoulder. His other hand was tight on the doorknob, ready to shut it, to lock out the world again if it went wrong. But it didn't. Mrs. Robinson was the first to step through the door. Her arms were full, blankets, soup, fresh bread still warm in foil. Her glasses fogged from the steam and her eyes immediately landed on Amara. "Oh, sweet baby," she said softly. "You must be so tired." Behind her came Tom, slower, careful not to crowd. He held a bag of groceries in one hand, and in the other, a soft teddy bear, one that had sat on a forgotten diner shelf for years. "I thought your sister might like a friend," he said gently. And then Officer Murphy, bringing up the rear. No uniform, no badge. Just a man who looked tired but kind, and deeply determined to do the right thing. They didn't come in loud or fast. No one asked big questions. No one pushed. They sat on the floor, like guests in someone's home. Elijah watched them for a long moment, his jaw clenched, heart thudding in his chest like a warning drum. But nothing bad happened. No one tried to take Amara. No one asked him to leave. And after a few minutes, Mrs. Robinson offered her soup like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I brought bowls," she said, "but if you 2 have your own, we'll use those instead." Elijah blinked. He reached for 2 mismatched plastic bowls from the corner and handed them over without a word. That was the beginning. They ate in silence. The warm food filled the room with smells Elijah hadn't felt in weeks. Not just hunger smells, but comfort smells. Chicken, thyme. The kind of food a mom might make when you had the flu and she rubbed your back until you fell asleep. After dinner, Amara curled up beside Mrs. Robinson and dozed off, the teddy bear tucked under her chin. Elijah kept glancing at her like he didn't believe what he was seeing, like it might vanish if he blinked too hard. Tom leaned back against the wall, arms resting on his knees. "You've done a hard thing, kid," he said. "Harder than most adults could handle." Elijah looked down at his lap. "I didn't know what else to do." "Start by telling us the whole story," Murphy said, voice calm. "Everything. We've got time." And so Elijah spoke. He told them about the day his mom passed, how the nurses had stepped out for only 5 minutes, and when they came back, she was gone. How he'd held her hand, not even knowing what to do, until the social workers arrived and said he'd be taken to one place and Amara to another. "They said I was too old to get adopted with her," he whispered. "Said she'd get placed quicker, but she doesn't even sleep without me. I'm the only one she knows." So he waited until shift change, packed their things in a trash bag, and walked out through the side door. No one stopped him. No one noticed. They rode a bus until their money ran out. He chose Pine Grove because it looked quiet and safe, just somewhere no one would notice them long enough to survive. "I never meant to trick people," Elijah added quickly. "I just thought, if I said she was sick, they'd give us food without asking too many questions." Tom nodded slowly. "You were right about that. You're a smart boy, Elijah." Elijah looked away. "I didn't want to lie, but I didn't want to lose her." "You lied to protect her," Mrs. Robinson said gently, smoothing Amara's curls. "That's not the kind of lie we punish. That's the kind we understand." The tears came then, not loud sobs, just the kind that roll out without permission. He covered his face with his hands, his shoulders trembling. Murphy sat quietly, for a while before speaking again. "Here's the truth now. You don't have to run anymore." Elijah's head snapped up. "But we're not sending you back," Mrs. Robinson interrupted, firm and clear. "Not unless you want to. Go. And no one's splitting you up. That much, I promise." Murphy nodded. "There's a process, sure. But in this town, we take care of our own. We can figure this out." Elijah swallowed hard. "You're serious?" Tom smiled gently. "Kid, we already had your next meal packed before we knocked on that door." They helped him pack the essentials. The crayon drawings, the photo of his mom, the flashlight, the blanket, the few toys he'd saved for Amara. He tried to carry everything himself, but Tom gently took the heavy bag from him. "Let someone else carry the weight for a little while," he said. "You've earned the rest." Mrs. Robinson lifted Amara with ease, whispering soft lullabies as she held the sleeping child to her shoulder. The five of them walked back toward town together. Slowly. No rush. Elijah looked back once at the old house, dark now, shadows falling across the porch like goodbye. It had been his shelter, his shield. But it had also been his prison. Now, for the first time in months, he was walking toward something else. Not just help, a home. And in that moment, the cold wind biting his cheeks, his sister safe, grown-ups walking beside him not to take something away, but to give. He realized the impossible had happened. He wasn't alone anymore. The first night at Mrs. Robinson's house felt like a dream Elijah was scared to believe in. The room was warm, not just in temperature, but in a way he couldn't quite explain. Maybe it was the soft blankets on the bed. Maybe the glow from the small lamp on the dresser. Maybe it was the way the clean sheets smelled faintly of lavender and cinnamon. Or maybe it was because, for the first time in months, Amara slept peacefully beside him. Without fear. No alarms. Made of tin cans tied to string. No creaking walls or scurrying mice. Just stillness. And safety. He stayed awake longer than he should have, staring at the ceiling, listening to Amara breathe. At some point, his eyes closed, and when he opened, them. Sunlight was streaming through the lace curtains, and the smell of pancakes and coffee floated in from downstairs. He jolted upright. His first thought was panic. I overslept. Amara's alone. But then he heard her giggle. "Leah, look, my pancake has a smile." He followed her voice down to the kitchen, bare feet brushing across soft rugs and wooden floors that creaked in all, the right, comforting ways. And there she was, sitting at the table, wearing clean pajamas, her hair gently brushed into two fluffy puffs, syrup already on her chin. Mrs. Robinson looked up and smiled warmly. "Good morning, sleepyhead. We were just about to wake you." He stood there, unsure what to say, how to move, or even how to feel. He was used to running, to hiding, to patching problems with whatever scraps he could find. This felt like someone had pressed pause on the storm inside him. "Come eat," Amara said, waving her fork. "Mrs. Rob makes faces with fruit. Mine has blueberry eyes." "Elijah," Mrs. Robinson added gently, "there's hot chocolate in the blue mug, with marshmallows." It was the first time he'd ever been offered anything without needing to ask. Later that morning, Officer Murphy came by, this time with a woman in a blazer who introduced herself as a child services caseworker. But she wasn't cold or scary like Elijah had feared. Her name was Ms. Garcia, and she sat on the couch like she'd known them her whole life. "I'm not here to split you up," she said softly. "In fact, I'm here to make sure you stay together, legally, safely, permanently." Elijah didn't speak for a moment. Then he asked, "Even if I lied?" "You didn't lie," she said. "You survived. That's different." Ms. Garcia explained that Mrs. Robinson was filing for emergency guardianship. It would take paperwork and some court steps, but with the town supporting it, there was no reason they couldn't stay right here, in this house, in this town, with each other. "Do I still have to hide?" he asked. "No," she answered, and her voice was so certain it settled something inside his chest. "Not anymore." The next few days came like waves, but soft ones. Not the crashing kind that knocked him down. These were the kind that slowly wore away the edges of fear. Elijah was enrolled back in school. His third-grade teacher, Miss Collins, greeted him with the gentlest voice and an open notebook already labeled with his name. She didn't ask him why he had missed so many weeks. She just sat beside him during lunch and taught him how to catch up, one page at a time. Amara started preschool at the community center. Mrs. Robinson made sure she had everything, from a little pink backpack with a bunny keychain to sparkly boots and a sweater with a rainbow across it. On her first day, Amara turned to Elijah at the doorway and whispered, "Is it okay if I go without you?" Elijah crouched down and took her tiny hand. "It's more than okay," he said, "because I'll be right here when you get back." That afternoon, she came home with a finger-painted picture and a new friend named Lucy. And for the first time, Elijah felt the smallest piece of the weight lift off his shoulders. Each night ended with hot chocolate, a story, and a kiss goodnight. Not from their mom, but from someone who had chosen to love them anyway. Mrs. Robinson never made a big show of it. She didn't ask 1,000 questions or force hugs. She just left the hallway light on. She washed their clothes without comment. She folded Elijah's sweaters the way his mom used to, sleeves tucked under, never rolled, and one evening, after a quiet dinner, Elijah stood beside her while she baked, watching flour fall like snow into the bowl. "Why'd you help us?" he finally asked. She paused, wiping her hands on her apron. "Because someone once helped me," she said. "And because you didn't need punishment. You needed a door." By the end of the second week, Elijah had made 2 friends at school and memorized the diner's entire breakfast menu. Tom had offered him a part-time job after school, dishes, clearing tables, maybe learning to fry eggs one day. "You ever worked a grill?" Tom asked. "No, sir." "You ever wanted to?" Elijah had grinned. "Not until now." Tom laughed. "Good. Let's start with plates and go from there." Word spread quickly in Pine Grove. Not in a bad way, in the best way. People stopped Mrs. Robinson in the street just to tell her they were proud of her. Kids at school asked Amara to join their games, and Elijah started hearing his name in conversations that didn't end in pity, but in praise. "That boy's got a good head on his shoulders. You should have seen the way he helped Mrs. Peterson carry her groceries. He's not just polite. He's kind." And slowly, the fear that had shaped every second of his life began to quiet down. Not vanish. Not overnight, but it softened. One night, as Mrs. Robinson tucked Amara in, Elijah stood by the window in his room, looking out at the quiet street. The porch light flickered, and a single firefly blinked across the yard. He pressed his forehead to the cool glass, watching it disappear into the dark. Then he whispered, "We're okay." He wasn't saying it to anyone in particular, but he felt it. For the first time in a long time, he meant it. 5 years slipped by like pages in a well-loved book, gently turned, a little worn at the edges, but filled with meaning, and on this particular Saturday, Elijah stood behind the counter at Tom's Diner, wearing a clean apron, sleeves rolled up, and a quiet confidence in his eyes that hadn't been there the day he first stepped through the door asking for food. The diner was full, the breakfast crowd loud and cheerful, forks clinking against plates, steam curling up from mugs of coffee. Elijah handled it all with ease. He moved between tables, refilled syrups, knew every regular's name. He even had his own name tag now. Not just Elijah, but assistant manager printed underneath. Tom still worked mornings, mostly for the company and the habit of it, but he let Elijah run the register. He'd earned it, with years of loyalty, hard work, and something deeper, heart. The bell above the door jingled, and in ran a blur of curls and energy. Amara, now 8, her backpack bouncing against her. Back her cheeks flushed pink from the cold. "Guess what?" she blurted, rushing to the counter. "I got the lead in the school play. I'm Dorothy. Like the main Dorothy." Elijah laughed and leaned on the counter. "From Wizard of Oz?" She nodded furiously. "We're gonna have real costumes and everything. Mrs. Thompson says I have good stage presence." Behind her, Mrs. Robinson entered more calmly, a to-go box of pastries in her hands, her silver hair tucked under a knit cap. She smiled as she set it down. "She's been floating ever since she got the news." Amara tugged at Elijah's apron. "You'll come, right? You'll sit in the front row?" "Only if you don't forget your lines," he teased. She rolled, her eyes. "I never forget my lines. I'm a professional." They all laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from familiarity, not performance. A family laugh. Life in Pine Grove had moved forward, as life does, but some things hadn't changed at all. Officer Murphy, now the chief of police, still stopped by the diner every Saturday. He always ordered the same thing. Black coffee, 1. Egg, 1 toast, no fuss. But every time he asked Elijah the same quiet question. "You doing all right?" And Elijah always gave the same answer, not out of habit, but truth. Better than all right. Because he was. He had friends now, real ones. He had responsibilities, a future. He no longer woke up expecting the world to take something away. Instead, he woke up wondering what he might give. He still visited the old house on Mill Road sometimes. It had been boarded up again, but not forgotten. In fact, the town had plans to turn it into a community shelter. They called it the Firefly House after Amara's crayon drawings they'd found in the hidden corner. Her lights in the dark, people still talked about the kids who once lived there in secret, not with pity, but with pride. "They didn't just survive," someone said once. "They taught us how to care." Elijah was 13 now. His jeans actually fit. His shoes had no holes. He was growing tall, his voice starting to deepen, his handwriting a little messier. But he still walked Amara home from school every day. Still packed her lunch. Still made sure her teddy bear, now missing one ear, was tucked in beside her every night. And one evening, after a quiet dinner of spaghetti and garlic bread, Elijah found himself alone with Mrs. Robinson, sitting on the back porch under a blanket. Liddy. Stars were just starting to blink above them, and fireflies danced lazily across the yard. "I've been thinking about the future," he said suddenly. Mrs. Robinson looked at him over her teacup. "That's a good habit to have. I want to be someone that helps kids, like me and Amara. Kids who fall through the cracks, kids who run, kids who hide." She nodded slowly. "I don't know if that means being a lawyer or a counselor, or something else," he continued. "But I want to help them find the kind of people who don't give up on them." Mrs. Robinson smiled, and for a moment her eyes misted. "You've already started doing that, Elijah," she said softly. "You've been doing it every day, just by living with kindness." He sat in thoughtful silence, watching a firefly blink against the porch rail. "I used to think we were alone," he said, "like it was just me and Amara against the world. But now I know. People were waiting for us. We just had to stop running." Mrs. Robinson reached over and took his hand, not because he needed it, but because she did. "And now," she whispered, "you're part of the ones waiting for someone else." On the anniversary of their arrival in Pine Grove, Mrs. Robinson, Elijah, and Amara visited a small cemetery at the edge of town. 2 stones rested under the old willow tree. Side by side, one for their mother, one for their father, moved there by the town's help. They brought fresh flowers. Amara painted little butterflies on river stones and placed them at the base. Elijah sat between the graves and spoke softly about school. about the diner, about Amara's upcoming play. "She's doing okay," he said. "We're okay. I think you'd be proud." He didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, he stood up, took Amara's hand, and led her back to the car. On the way, she skipped a little, humming something from her play. The weeks moved on. Amara's show was a success. The whole town came. She wore ruby slippers and belted "Somewhere Over the Rainbow" with all her heart. Elijah sat in the front row, just like he'd promised, clapping the loudest of all. Later that year, Elijah gave a speech at the Pine Grove town meeting. He was asked to speak about youth resilience, but he didn't talk about trauma or tragedy. He talked about second chances. "Sometimes all it takes is one person opening a door," he said. "Sometimes that's all the difference between surviving and finally living." People stood to clap before he even sat down. And one summer night, years after that cold evening when he'd first stepped into the diner with a lie wrapped in fear, Elijah sat once again on Mrs. Robinson's porch. Amara, now nearly a teenager herself, brought out 2 mugs of cocoa and dropped onto the swing beside him. The house creaked around them. The fireflies were back. "Do you ever think about it?" she asked. He looked over. "About what?" "Back then, when we were hiding, when we didn't know what would happen next." Elijah thought about it. "Yeah," he said, "but not in the same way. Now when I think about it, I don't feel scared. I feel grateful. Because somehow, everything we ran from led us right here." Amara smiled. "Home." He nodded. "Home." And as they sipped their cocoa, surrounded by soft porch light and the quiet hum of the town that had taken them in, Elijah understood something fully for the first time. They hadn't just been saved. They'd been found, loved, and now they belonged.